What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
I'm good. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to us once again. Hopefully, we add a little bit to your education, your daily education. This one is going to be really interesting because I think it's going to make a really big impact later on for people. And I actually believe that what we're talking about today could actually really change, well, hell, the world. I think it will change. I think it's got humanity to where it is. And what we're talking about is
Taboo topic
psilocybin.
that hopefully won't be so taboo.
Yeah, magic
Future.
mushrooms or psilocybin that I've heard. I don't know this. I think it's true, but the correct pronunciation is psilocybin instead of psilocybin. But whatever, you guys know what we're talking about, and we are certainly not experts on this, but we want to just bring the knowledge that we know about it to you guys, and I think it's going to really play a big role, and eventually it's going to be kind of legalized. It's going to kind of go the way that marijuana is going.
Yeah.
in
We're
our
certainly
in our
sitting on
country.
the precipice of kind of the future of what this,
Yeah,
these types of medicines involve and how they're prescribed and
right.
whatnot.
Specifically, magic mushrooms have gotten just a really bad rap, from the 60s and 70s and all that. And now with the research coming out on them, we're really seeing some amazing things with that. So we'll talk about it. So
Well, why were they getting a bad rap then, Keoni? Are you talking just, that was the general drug prohibition era or specific?
what was happening was it got some pretty good press in like the late 50s, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then that along with LSD and some other hallucinogenic drugs all of a sudden became like a party drug in like the 60s. And because of that, because it kind of went out of into the street and became a street drug, it just got a bad rap, and some things were said about it that just are not true. Then also, if you don't know how to dose this stuff and do it appropriately, you can have a bad reaction. But there's not a case study with that I know of people using magic mushrooms where they didn't, they had some negative side effects, but none of the as far as I know, jumping out of windows and killing themselves and all that stuff. But
Right.
I will say this, as far as one of the things that I want to go through in this podcast is as far as drugs or medicines or herbs and things like that, this is considered a very, very safe thing based on the research that we have. But we'll talk about it in a little bit here.
Yeah.
But to get into it, psilocybin or psilocybin mushrooms, they occur on all continents. I mean, the majority of the species are found in like the tropical areas, subtropical areas. The most commonly used form that you may get is Psilocybin cubensis. That's the main one, and has a compound in there called psilocybin. All right, and it's actually, psilocybin is actually a pro-drug because that's not actually what is affecting the hallucinogenic state that you see in your brain or anything like that. It gets actually converted into psilocybin. And that compound actually binds to serotonin receptors, and that's where the magic happens, so to speak, where you get, the possible visions, or you just get these extraordinary, awe-inspiring experiences where you actually see the sublime. You get possibly ego disintegration and all that. And many people have come out of these experiences completely changed in their worldview and for the better.
Yeah.
Of it. And the really neat thing about it is it only takes 1 or 2 doses, and it's not addictive for this to happen. And just let's take a step back, and there's some theories out there that as our ancestors, hunter-gatherers, followed like herds of grass-eating animals like buffalo, cows, whatever, antelope and stuff like that, these mushrooms would actually grow out of their droppings,
Right.
right?
Yeah, the stoned ape theory.
Yeah. And basically we would consume these mushrooms, and we are one of what, like, I think that they've documented like 23
Variations
species.
of Homo, whatever.
Yeah. And also,
Right.
these mushrooms are consumed by monkeys, apes. It's been
Gotcha.
documented in the wild. But for us, these mushrooms the theory goes, may have helped expand our mind and
Yeah.
bring us into the modern day and help give us that gift of, reason, intelligence, and
Yeah, that is the
having
stoned ape
conscious.
theory from
Yeah,
Terence McKenna. I'm not sure if
right.
you've heard of that specifically, Keoni,
Yeah,
or not, but basically exactly as you were describing, as we started migrating around and moving to new areas and following herds, just like you mentioned, kind of stumbling into these magic mushrooms, and then that expanding, I guess, the capabilities of those early hominoids.
yeah. And we see that these mushrooms or hallucinogenic plants have been used all over the world. We see great documentation of it being used in ancient Mayan cultures
Yeah.
and Aztec cultures. There's something called mushroom stones. They really revered this. It helped give them vision. It helped, had healing capacity. They were highly, highly revered. It gave people insight into the spirit world and things like that.
Yeah,
So
you
they
got to
they were.
imagine back in the day, you got to be like, hey man, this is these are real good. You eat these, this is a little different.
Yep.
Like a
Yeah.
grape.
Oh yeah. So one of the things that I to kind of get an idea, a lot of times you get an idea of what you're dealing with these mushrooms by them being bruised. You can see like a bluish color to them. That gives you one indication that you actually have, mushrooms that contain the psilocybin in them. So if they're bruised, the stem or anything like that, and what's consumed is actually the caps and the stems. You don't really, there's not really psilocybin in or psilocybin in the spores or anything like that. So it's the cap and the stems that are really consumed.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
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 those
far
are,
we got them growing all over the world naturally. Many
yep,
years of them documented with
yep,
human and various different animal consumption.
right,
Yeah.
right.
How do you think the
Yeah.
giraffe got such a long neck, man?
that's right. And as you're implying, so the effects are like euphoria, visual and mental hallucinations, changes in perceptions, profound distorted senses of time, perceived spiritual experiences. But on the other hand, depending on how you dose it, it can also give you, adverse reactions. Like it can make you nauseous, give you panic attacks. It can, give you anxiety and so on and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're going to do this, you want to make sure that if you're going to partake in these, that you really make sure that you're with, or try to make sure you're with somebody who's experienced in it. And what we found through the research, just recent research, is that set and setting makes a big deal. So, being in a comfortable place, dosing it appropriately, using it like an eye mask, laying there, having somebody there as like a designated driver that can help guide you through that, somebody that you trust, would be good. And that's especially true depending on how you dose it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so
Which is
how,
is why we hopefully get more study on this. I mean, we hope that this is morely studied, so we are studied more, so we can find out
right.
what the appropriate dose is, find out how we
And
adjust
we
that
have,
set and setting.
right. And we have an idea of what that dose is based on the study. And there's a lot more study. People are going to be surprised, but there's a lot more study that's being done on this than meets the eye. I mean, there's major universities throughout the United States and North America that are researching this. So we're talking about Harvard, we're talking about University of Toronto, we're talking about Purdue, we're talking
Johns
about
Hopkins.
John Hopkins. I mean, lots of study on this, which is really, really great. As I said, like, well, let's talk about the dosing on it. Like Psilocybin cubensis, that's the most common species. That's what most people partake in. Most of the time you do it based on dried dosing, dried mushrooms. And so typically 1 gram is kind of like the dose that you kind of get this lift off of a hallucinogenic experience. And then you get this 5 gram dose called the heroic dose, 5 to 10 gram dose of it, which can give you kind of like you can expect ego disintegration, that type of thing, and have like very profound experience with that type of dose. And there's people out there that have dosed it higher than 10 grams, up to 20, sometimes 30 grams, which I don't, based on what I'm reading, I don't recommend for anybody to do it. But what's very interesting, unless you're with somebody who's experienced, I would start off probably with, depending on what you're trying to do, with microdosing. So we said 1 gram is kind of like liftoff, but 1/10 to 1/20 a gram is considered microdosing. It's kind of like below the level of intoxication.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really fascinating about this, according to Paul Stamets, this level of microdosing is actually the dosing that can give you neurogenic benefits. So you actually get neurogenesis with microdosing more so than you do with macrodosing. You can think about microdosing as like enhancing your brain, and then macrodosing as like changing your life based on, the experience you had.
Right.
And there's, go ahead.
That just to break, neurogenesis being the creation of basically new synapses, new connections within the brain.
New
so
connections.
How amazing is that?
Yeah, new growth of brain cells and all that stuff. And there's protocols that you can do that. The two most famous ones is there's a guy named James Fadiman who does his protocol. He does 1 day on, 2 days off with his microdosing. And then Stamets protocol, Paul Stamets, is like 4 days on, 3 days off. I don't understand the difference here, but I'd imagine you have like a day off so you don't get acclimated to the dose at all. Anyway, so there's different ways of doing that, but the microdosing is especially safe. You're going to be unlikely to have like the negative, anxiety producing stuff that may go on with more of the higher doses of it.
Yeah, and there's some weird or interesting kind of subjective material that was coming out 2, 3, 4, 5-ish years ago about a lot of microdosing in the tech industry, and people kind of accessing a flow state of work with those low level microdoses. And it's just, again, talking about neurogenesis, how that would work while you're thinking about working and getting into the flow of things, whatever that may be. And you've opened or accessed or at least started the process of neurogenesis, opening more of your brain in theory, or connecting more of it to each other.
Yep. And that's what you hear from people, like what it seems to do. And you probably see a lot of this in Silicon Valley, right? Or people that have to use their creativity in their jobs and stuff like this. They talk about microdosing really helping that. And the dosing also creates a level of contentment or happiness. And, the happier you are, the more creative you are, and vice versa, right? So the more creative you are, we are creative by nature, and the more creative you are, the happier you are. On the other hand, the more depressed you are, the less creative you are. You seem like you're not contributing to society. You become more depressed. This can really help people get out of that state. So when we talk about creating a happier world, and that's why I said I think things like this really can create a happier world. This is where it's at. But it's not only that. Psilocybin is currently being researched not only for like happiness and creativity, but it's being researched for stopping depression, anxiety, many other psychiatric conditions. Has broad acting beneficial effects. So we're talking about PTSD. One dose can snap somebody out of PTSD, from what they're saying. Existential anxiety about death. You get a awful cancer diagnosis. The doctor tells you, get your stuff in order, because according to statistics, you have, 6 months to 9 months to live based on your, pancreatic diagnosis, cancer diagnosis. This has changed lives. And helped people really live fulfilling lives for the amount of time that they have. Addictions. I mean, there was a study out there, Brian. This is fascinating. I heard this through Paul Stamets, where, one of the most addictive substances there is cigarettes, like tobacco. People that have smoked their whole life, there's a study of just like, I don't know, 15 people. 10 out of the 15 people, after 1 or 2 doses, stopped smoking cigarettes immediately from dosing this. I mean, that I do acupuncture for stopping smoking. You know how hard it is to get somebody to stop smoking? I mean, it's like finding that switch that just switches the brain where you're just like, I'm done with this, negative behavior that I'm doing. This seems to flip that switch.
Yeah. Certainly shining a light on your negative behavior, making you look at it a different way.
Right. One of the other things that there's not a whole lot of treatment for is tinnitus or ringing in the ears, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the only treatment that I know of that seems to help a little bit is what I do, is acupuncture. There's no drugs that help that. Acupuncture can certainly help. Sometimes Chinese herbs, but according to some of the research, it seems like doing psilocybin can really help that. It may even improve hearing and vision. It may improve your senses, and definitely cognition. So think about that. That's really cool. It just gives you, when you think about what's going on in psychiatry and medicines for like mental disorders, we know, and we talked about this a little bit, Brian, that is really just symptom management. You give somebody, like for depression, an SSRI or some type of benzodiazepine for anxiety or whatever, but it's kind of one of these things that just helps manage it. That's what prescriptions drugs do for the most part. They manage it. Well, here we have a medicine that is natural, that is not addictive, has broad ranging beneficial effects, and it only takes 1, maybe 2 doses to get you rid of your problem. I mean, that's why they're doing all this research on it.
Sounds like a Schedule 1 to me.
And well, it indeed is. It is indeed classified as a Schedule 1. However, we'll talk about that. That is going to change. That's going to change. So it does something to the brain. They have, in the brain, they have like, what's your default mode network kind of connections in your brain? Do you always default towards a depressive state or anxiety state? Well, these hallucinogenics, especially these mushrooms, seem to just scramble that up and rewire you. That's like a reset button that gets you to be like, snap out of it. It's like a slap to the face, snap out of it. This life is great. You're going to enjoy it. You're going to be happier. You feel, you no longer live in a world, from what I've heard, where everything and everybody is out to get you. You know what I'm saying? You're more optimistic. And we see that right now, right? Like there's a certain percent of our population who thinks our government is actually out to kill us, or thinks, or thinks like the vaccine that by the way, I just got my COVID vaccine. So anyway,
Nice.
there's a certain group of people who think that vaccine is administered to us to kill us. Well, right. I'm so far I'm alive, but imagine living your life like that, where everybody's out to get you, do you harm, you question, you don't trust anybody. This can really help that. It makes for a happier world where you actually scramble the brain, where you're like, damn, Brian is a neat guy.
I really hope they're thinking that. Yeah. If that's what the mushrooms bring you.
Yeah.
I recommend them.
It's almost like, what I've
allows
read,
for that neurogenesis that we're talking about. So you're connecting new synapses and being able to take a more outside look or a different approach to your thought process than you previously were. And
right.
We're seeing that.
Right. It's almost like, picture yourself on a boat in the middle of the ocean by yourself. If you were in that situation, that's scary as hell. Right? It's awesome. You look out at the ocean, you're like, the ocean could just swell a wave and take me under, and no man. It's like touching the sublime. But after the dose of the mushrooms, it's almost like you're content being there and you're just enjoying the awesomeness of it all. Yeah,
you appreciate the waves.
Yeah, you have like this profound, you have this profound feeling of connectedness where it's like, okay, so if a big wave does come and swallow me whole, I am the wave. I'm okay. That type of thing. it gets rid of a lack of being separated from people. It gives you, it mitigates loneliness you may feel or isolation that you may feel. And that's huge. That's the heart of depression and anxiety and a lot of psychiatric, disorders and stuff like that. So it's a pretty awesome thing that we have that, grows everywhere and is cheap. I mean, hell, you can grow your own. I mean, you can go to any website, how to grow your own magic mushrooms, and you can get the kit and grow them.
Yeah, and definitely I think in Colorado it's legal.
Yes. Let's
grow your own. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. As you stated before, it's considered a Schedule 1 drug. What does that mean? It's actually the same as characterized as heroin and LSD, which means they have currently no accepted medical use, and a high potential for abuse. However, mushrooms do not have a high potential for abuse. They just don't. They're not addictive at all. In fact, most people who have done that I've talked to said, I did one dose and it changed my life, and I just never had the need to do it again. But you are right. And I think the first city, Denver, Colorado, became the first U.S. city to decriminalize.
Yeah, I'm looking right now.
Mushrooms.
Yeah, not sure if it's necessarily legal or kind of like marijuana was at the beginning.
It's almost
where it's like,
it's almost
turn a blind
like
eye.
Yeah, it's like like you're probably not gonna get arrested for it or anything. They're gonna turn a blind eye to it. It depends on what you're doing. Like if you're selling the stuff on the street, that may be more of a problem.
Sure.
But so we had Denver. Soon following that, we have Oakland, became the second U.S. city to decriminalize psilocybin mushrooms. And now Chicago City Council introduced a resolution expressed support for decriminalizing hallucinogenic plants. Santa Cruz, California is another one. I mean, there's cities all over the country who are beginning to decriminalize this. Oregon, state of Oregon, voted to legalize it, especially for mental health treatments and licensed centers. And then just recently, Somerville, Massachusetts, I think, has decriminalized it too. So basically, you can think about it as you're probably not going to get in trouble if you are basically not selling them and have up a stand where you are selling them. However, that is going to happen. Just I think like with marijuana, because it's a very, very safe thing to do based on the research. And there's quite a bit of research. I mean, as with anything, we need more research. And this stuff is going to go to market. One thing is they're going to be making, and factories, I'm sure some companies are going to be making psilocybin in a pure form, which is probably going to bump up the price. But damn, I mean, all you need to do is you can grow them easily and do it yourself.
As far as you know, Keoni, and we may not know this, but is like talking about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, what is it about psilocybin, or how does it work where it does have these profound effects? So like cannabis, obviously, it's not attaching to a variety of receptors.
Right. Cannabis works by a different mechanism, the way I understand it, right? It works by connecting to the cannabinoid receptors and stuff like that. This one works by connecting to certain types of serotonin receptors, which help give you the hallucinogenic effects and the happy effects. It helps boost dopamine. And based on that has a number of things that go on where it can and just enhance your sensory perception throughout. But it works different than cannabis. So, okay. As far as let's talk about adverse effects, because there are adverse effects of them, but based on the literature, they're usually due to the fact that people are doing something else along with it, and especially alcohol. So if you're going to do it, I wouldn't do it with alcohol, and I certainly wouldn't do it with any other drugs at all. And if you do it that way and have a good setting, you're probably not going to get the bad trips or what are known as like the panic reactions from it, especially if you have somebody going, holding yourself through that. There's no studies that have linked psilocybin to any birth defects although I wouldn't recommend it for pregnant women to do it. I mean, we just don't know that much about it.
Yeah, you really
You
want to
know,
stew
if
on something beyond mushrooms and think about the
right,
baby growing inside you.
right. But if you're gonna do, if yeah, exactly. If you're gonna do like the heroic doses, very high doses, you need to have somebody trained there, because you can hallucinate so much that you don't know where you are or what you're doing. You just need somebody to make sure that you're there, so you don't do something dumb like walk out your ninth floor window or something like that. You know,
Sure, sure.
you just need somebody to watch you and bring you through that. But the adverse effects are slim to none, and the toxicity of the stuff is extremely low. um, you know, I think let me look through my notes here. I think I wrote this down to where, um, yeah, toxic. So the LD50 for a mouse is 280 milligrams per kilogram. When compared to the effective dose for humans, which is 0.02 milligrams per kilogram. Basically, if you don't understand that, it's basically just saying you know, like you gotta eat a bunch of that stuff to like kill yourself with it. I mean, it's basically you have to drown in it.
Yeah.
Um, uh, as far as like drug testing, I know this will be a question. Yeah, it is detectable in the blood up to 7 days after ingestion. What else?
I don't think it's on the typical urinalysis, just to add to that.
Okay, I don't think it is either. But the other thing about it is there's no real dependence on it. We talked about, right? Um, a 2010 Dutch study ranked the relative harm of psilocybin mushrooms compared to a selection of 19 recreational drugs, including alcohol, cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, tobacco. Psilocybin mushrooms are ranked as the illicit drug with the lowest harm compared to all of those.
Oh, wow.
You know, so um,
I think that kind of speaks to speaking against kind of that party drug aspect that we were mentioning it was getting a bad rap for in the
yeah,
60s or 70s.
right,
It's not something you're just willy-nilly doing for fun. You know,
right,
it's going to take it's going to take a few hours of your day, probably
right.
the whole day.
Right. Well, that's exactly. So I think you hit on something there. So what can you expect from what I read is if you do a dose between 1 and 10 grams, you can expect to be on a ride for anywhere from 2 to 6 hours to be under the influence.
Yeah, I'd like to recommend a site just since we're on the topic. There's a great website called Erowid, EROWID, and it is
Oh,
essentially a database of all drugs. I mean, anything from meth, you
right,
can look there and you get, and you know, the positive, they break down positive effects, negative effects, and then the, you know, middle of the road effects, positive or
right,
negative, depending how you look at them. And they also, on that website, there's like a graph for the half-life of drugs and kind of how much you take and how much you would expect, you know,
right,
this to last 9 hours or whatever the case may be. But it's a
right.
fantastic resource. And it does point to on that website a lot of different research studies, that Johns Hopkins study and stuff like that. So that'd be something I'd recommend to go check out. It's arrowwood.org, I
Yeah,
believe.
that's great. Yeah, so based on that, you can expect to be on a ride for 2 to 6 hours, depending on the dose. And uh, the other resources that I would just tell people about, a really good book that recently came out is How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan.
Yeah.
That's a great book to read on it.
What does he have to say about this, Keoni? Because I know that book had definitely had an impact with you.
Oh yeah, I think that's a must read if people are considering to do this. He basically, I think, brought to the forefront that, you know, these things are, it's a very safe, it seems to be, based on the research, a very safe form of medicine with broad benefits that, you know, can that only requires minimal doses, and it's not addictive. And I think he brought that to the forefront, and he it's very well documented and researched. He talked to the experts in the field. So I think that book is really going to help move psilocybin and magic mushrooms along to where it eventually becomes like completely decriminalized, and you'll start seeing like it being sold, right? Like we do with in legal states with marijuana and stuff like that. But How to Change Your Mind is a good one. Another good one by Paul Stamets is Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. Now, keep in mind the species psilocybe. There's tons of mushrooms that contain psilocybin, but there's other species that don't fall in the psilocybin genre of mushrooms that also contain it. But the one that's used the most, as we said, is Psilocybin cubensis, and that's the one that has. It's definitely not the one that has the most psilocybin in it, but it is the one that's most commonly used and grows all over the United States, pretty much.
Yeah, that's the one on Arrowwood that they're basing everything off of.
Right, and that's the one I think with the most research. And then other resources, Sacred Mushrooms for Visions, that's by Ralph Metzer, and then Food of the Gods by Terrence McKenna. Hallucinogenic Mushrooms in North America by Jonathan Ott and Jeremy Bigwood. And then if you just want to go online, there's something called MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. This is a nonprofit research educational organization that develops medical, legal, cultural context for people to benefit from the careful use of psychedelics and even marijuana. And then I recommend people watch the movie Fantastic Fungi because it talks a little bit about that. And then Paul Stamets actually brought up something really neat. There's actually an app called microdose.me, M-E, and that is a really cool app because it's basically you can be a citizen scientist, so to speak, with this app with microdose. And if you microdose these mushrooms, you can actually put into the app your experiences of that and let, kind of the world know like how this works, microdose, and what are you having sensory enhancement, what's working, what's doing things, what are the negative side effects. I think that's a good one to download if you are using these, because it can certainly help.
Contribute to the cause.
It will definitely contribute to the cause.
I would also recommend Tim Ferriss. He does a lot of writing and podcast on psilocybin specifically, and he I forget what they called it, but you're familiar with Burning Man, Keoni, the festival, where I guess a bunch of rich people go do drugs in the desert, from what I understand.
Right.
And he talked about during whatever Burning Man that he went to, he's been to a few of them, that he worked as like a guider or whatever they called it. It was someone that sat with someone who was on mushrooms. And if they were having a negative experience or going down a negative route, kind of guided them through that. And it was very interesting to hear him talk about what they taught him and how to react to that. Like in that crisis management course or what, the guider course that they were taking for that.
Right.
And just very interesting to kind of see how, your mind plays out and little steps along the way that he used to kind of get someone more on a positive route. And I think that would have some great information, if someone's considering it or whatever, wants to learn more, because it's a unique experience to have, someone who witnessed 4, 5, 6, however many mushroom trips whilst completely sober talk about people going through their experiences, and particularly those rough patches, and how they were guided through that without that getting any worse and improving and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. And I like all his work anyway. I think he puts out a lot of good stuff. So definitely look into
tweet him, get him on the show.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's
I would love to have him.
I would love to have him on the show. So anyway, Psilocybe cubensis, common name is cubes, right? It's the most common, easiest to grow, as we were saying. There's like marijuana, there's very many strains. Once humans get on their hands, you get certain strains with names like golden teacher, penis envy, pink buffalo mushrooms. These are all Psilocybe cubensis, but they pale kind of in comparison to other species like Psilocybe tamponensis, which are magic truffles or known as philosopher's stones, Psilocybe azurensis, flying saucer mushroom, psilocybe semilanceata, called liberty caps. Anyway, there's a ton out there, but with those, you have the dosing that me and you are putting out there, Brian, is really based on Psilocybin cubensis. As soon as you go to a different species of psilocybe, yeah, the dosing changes, man, because
Sure, it's like marijuana.
yeah,
There's all
so
different flavors
right,
and
because
whatnot.
the three I just named off have more psilocybin or psilocybin in it than the others, so you may want to adjust your dosing accordingly, or just know what you're getting if you're trying this out. And I don't recommend getting it off the street because you don't really know who you're getting, or get it from a trusted source. The really frustrating thing for me about this, being a healthcare practitioner, I have a number of patients who came to me asking where they can go for a clinician to guide them through this. And it's very hard to do that based on the legal challenges of that.
Right.
And most people don't have the time and money to go up to John Hopkins and pay thousands of dollars to go through their studies and do all that. But what I would recommend is, you're probably going to be, if you can find a guide who's used to that or somebody that you trust, it's great, especially if you want to do some of the bigger doses, like the 1 gram or 5 grams or more. But the microdosing is probably going to be very, very safe for you. And it's kind of below the intoxication level. So that's like 1/10 to 1/20 of a gram. From what I understand, that's dry weight of the mushroom, right? So
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to say we're not recommending anything. Go seek your medical health providers, direct information from them, and consult with them.
Yeah. Which, by the way, they don't know anything about it, but
Well, yeah, because they won't let us because it's Schedule 1. Thank God, right? Heaven forbid we learn.
Right. So anyway, so that's why a lot of this is underground, right?
Right,
And,
which is unfortunate.
It is unfortunate because it can seriously change people's lives for the better.
Familiar with what's going on with ketamine, Keoni?
I'm not.
Very similar. So I don't know a lot about the drug or anything like that, but I do know it is given to people for addiction and like or very intense bouts of depression. And it is something that can be legally administered by a medical professional, but you're talking, again, like you're saying, thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And, there's 4 or 5 locations in the entire continental United States, that sort of thing. But it's just these psychedelic world and all these different medicines are slowly opening up. And God, I wish we could just at least study them more and take the kind of stigma out of at least looking into it.
The stigma needs to be taken away from it, but the studies also need to be done. But a lot of this stuff, I mean, I'm all for it. I encourage people to at least try the microdosing, know what you get it from a trusted source. And I do what I can to help my patients to find people that can take them on these, at least hold their hand through that. But again, all of it is underground, unfortunately. But if you have the money and you have the time, you certainly can get in a clinical setting. And that's changing slowly but surely, where people will be able to go to clinicians like myself that are trained in holding people's hands through this and help walk them through that. And I think that will be, it's almost like it's going to be like a doctor certification or something to help people go through that with the more studies. But, it's a shame because it's a very, very safe thing, in my opinion, compared to prescription drugs, which only really manage symptoms. Whereas with this, you can do minimal doses. 1 or 2 doses are required to change people's lives for the better, and it's not addictive. There's very, very little room for harm for what we see if you do it right. The one thing I will say, if people do it, I just would not do it willy-nilly. I would make sure you have a good setting, be with somebody that you trust, and it will help you enjoy the ride, so to speak. But microdosing, a lot of times people just don't really notice anything except for maybe for sensory enhancement and stuff like that, and gives you a sense of calm and stuff like that. As soon as you get to the bigger doses, you're more likely to have some of the anxiety producing reactions, which aren't always there, right? But they can happen. I think in some of the studies they were saying, like, with some of these bigger doses, anywhere from 20 to 30% of the participants had like these negative reactions. But if you have somebody holding your hand and helping you through that, a lot of times those anxieties completely fade as fast as they come, as long as you have somebody there letting you know that you're okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and imagine if, Keoni, we could have mental health counselors be involved in this, and while you're doing it,
it would change people's lives. It would completely, you're talking about, like I said before, you're talking about getting people away from addiction with one or two doses of this. You're talking about helping people with PTSD or life stifling anxiety. It's done, one dose, done, and it was a pleasant experience, and you're done. Depression, you've been on medication your whole life, and you're dealing with the side effects. One dose, one or two doses, you're done. And for the most part, it was a pleasant experience. It wasn't a big deal. So yeah, absolutely, it should be given. Mental health care professionals, yeah, if I could wave my wand and say yes, I would give it to, let them be trained in all of it and give it out, because it's cheap. It's very, very cheap and profoundly powerful.
Yeah.
So anyway, guys, I hope that helps. Is there anything else we should talk about, Brian?
No, I mean, nothing else in particular. Like you said, it's great to have a spotter there. I'd always recommend people, if they're doing it for the first time or that sort of thing, have a spotter and have someone who's doing it with you. And that, to me, creates an optimal setting. Because you have someone to go through the experience with, and you have someone who is not going through the experience to guide you along the experience and ensure both parties are safe and whatnot. It can be kind of that calming force that you're continually alluding to by having someone there.
Yep. Let me just go back through the resources for people, just so you get it. So, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. I think that's a must read. Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World by Paul Stamets. I mean, if you really want to get into this, read some of these books. Sacred Mushrooms of Visions, Ralph Metzer. Food of the Gods, Terrence McKenna. Hallucinogenic Mushrooms in North America, Jonathan Ott, Jeremy Bigwood. Maps, check that out. You can go online to see that. I think it's maps.org. Check out the movie Fantastic Fungi. Fascinating. The world of mushrooms is just fascinating. Talk about psilocybin in that movie and the mushrooms there. And then Paul Stamets, I mean, what a gem and what a great resource of knowledge for mushrooms. I mean, download his app if you microdose.me. Be a citizen scientist. I guess the take-home message for this is, it appears very safe, has broad range acting benefits, one or two doses, minimal doses required. It's not addictive. If you have somebody who you trust or can hold your hand while you're doing this, if you haven't done it, then definitely do that.
Yeah, and be careful. And then I want to shout out my resource, Arrowwood, because I really recommend that. Just, I mean, you go there Arrowwood. And the whole purpose of the website is the title is documenting the complex relationship between humans and psychoactives.
And Arrowwood is spelled just like it sounds.
EROWID.org.
Okay, EROWI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And you can go on there and literally, I mean, they've got chemical, from Adderall medication to magic mushrooms and everything in between, as far as kind of what we see and how that impacts humans and whatnot.
Cool.
Fascinating stuff.
It really is. And I think it's going to be a different world as far as seeing the use of it, and a happier world too, the more people use these medicines.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Pi Day. Anything else, Keoni?
Nope, that's it. Thanks for listening, guys. Thank you.
We will chat with you guys next week. Until then, be well.
Bye.